Senator King, after Lewiston, after the tragedy in Lewiston, you and some colleagues proposed to do something about gun violence. It was called the Go Safe Act. So tell me what's in that, and maybe you could take those key points one at a time.
Well, the key point is the magazines. The shooter at Lewiston had two 20-bullet magazines duct taped together, so he could just keep firing. And what we tried to focus on in this bill is not the appearance of the weapon, but its lethality and functionality. And we narrowed it down. I say we, Martin Heinrich and I. He's a senator from New Mexico, big sportsman hunter. And we narrowed it down to magazine size, limited to 10 bullets, and it's permanently fixed, so it can't be flipped out and flipped back in. It has to be manually reloaded. Because in these shootings, often when there's an opportunity to stop them, it's when the shooter has to stop and reload. In the Lewiston case, apparently, he paused for a second. People thought he was reloading, charged him, and he killed him because he had essentially 40 bullets to shoot. So that's the real heart of the Go Safe Act. It's something that Martin and I had been working on for 3 or 4 years. Unfortunately, we didn't get the final version until after Lewiston, but that's, it clearly would address what I think is the most lethal part of this weapon. And there's no real Second Amendment problem. We're not taking anybody's guns away. We're not saying you can't own these. There's no confiscation or anything. There is a voluntary buyback provision. If people want to get rid of these weapons, they can be sold back and get their fair compensation. And then also, this is consistent with our history. 100 years ago, they banned Tommy guns. They heavily regulated Tommy guns, machine guns. And that's been true almost 100 years, since the 1930s. And what we're really talking about is the lethality of a weapon that really doesn't have anything to do with hunting or sport shooting or self-defense. It only has to do with limiting the ability to kill large numbers of people at the same time.
I mean, if you were an originalist, the Second Amendment, at the time that was written, we had what, front-loading muskets?
No such thing. Well, Antonin Scalia, the most conservative Supreme Court judge and the most conservative on guns, wrote the Heller decision, which banned the D.C. Banning of handguns. But he said in the decision, the Second Amendment, like all the other amendments, is not absolute. It doesn't provide the right to carry any weapon whatsoever in any place whatsoever. And so what we're doing, we really worked to stay within the Second Amendment, but also to do something about this horrible destruction of life that we saw in Lewiston. I was always reluctant about the earlier so-called assault weapons ban because they were based on what the gun looked like. You know, literally it's cosmetics. And my concern was the manufacturer can modify the cosmetics and still go on selling these lethal weapons. We tried to focus on what made them so especially dangerous, and the big deal is the magazine size.
What's the status of the Go Safe Act? Is it going to get a vote this year?
I don't think so. We've stopped our co-sponsors at 4 because they're only members of the Democratic caucus. It's myself, Martin Heinrich, Mark Kelly, who knows a thing or two about gun safety, and Michael Bennett from Colorado. We've been hoping for a Republican co-sponsor. That's what we're looking for. We want it to be bipartisan. So far, nobody's stepped up, but maybe next year we'll have better luck. To do anything, Phil, in Washington, you need bipartisan support. But I think, you know, everybody's going to be facing these kinds of tragedies, and I think some of my Republican colleagues are going to be moved to say we got to do something about this.
Well, you've got a Republican colleague, right, Susan Collins, on another bill that you've proposed since Lewiston, the Crisis Intervention Act.
Right.
What would that do, and why do you think that's a smart approach?
Well, what it would do basically is tell the military, if you have information about a person that may be suicidal or dangerous or potentially violent, let the state know through their crisis intervention system. It doesn't say what that should be. It just says each state has a different kind of red flag law, yellow flag law, notification law. It basically, here's what it is. It says, Army, if you see something, say something. And it's just a question of notification. Now, there were some level of notification between the military and the civilian authorities up here about this fellow that did the Lewiston shooting, but it was sort of, it wasn't as firm and clear as it should have been. So that's the bill that Susan and I are working on, to insist that the Army make those, or the military, make the notification clearly and unequivocally to the states so they can then take some action to protect their citizens and to protect this person who may be suicidal.
So that's a new mandate for all services of the U.S. military.
Correct, correct. But we're not setting up, we don't tell the states how to do whatever it is they do. We're just saying if the state has this kind of system, which Maine does, make it happen. Do the notification. That's really what it is.
So do you have in mind, like, who does the Army call? Like, is it the state police? Is it, who is it?
It would be a designated official of the state government that would have ultimate responsibility. You pointed out one of the problems in the situation was multiple responsibilities. Have you ever heard the term all of government? People say all of government. Whenever I hear that, I think that means none of government. Nobody's in charge. So our bill is, the idea is to have a single point of contact that would then be responsible for getting the word out, whether it's the state police, the local police, the sheriff's office, whoever. But having a more solid notification process is what the bill's really all about. But the last one that you haven't brought up yet, that I want to get to,
the blast over pressure.
Blast over pressure.
Yes.
Here's an amazing problem, Phil, that really hasn't been addressed. The fellow that did the shooting in Lewiston had been exposed to probably thousands of explosions. He was a trainer with grenades and explosive weapons, and it turns out it messed up his brain. There's been an analysis of his brain. It's severely damaged, traumatic brain injury. But here's the problem. Traumatic brain injury is the signal injury from the war on terror. It's a huge problem for people that were in Afghanistan and Iraq because they were exposed, and most of the exposure is to their own weapons. It's not to a bomb landing nearby, it's to their own weapons. And the Army really hasn't paid adequate attention to this. There have been thousands of these injuries. A friend of mine in the military calls it the silent wound. And it's one that, you don't see, there's no scar, but it's an absolute wound nonetheless. But basically what it does is tells the military, number one, screen everybody coming in for their brain situation. It's just like high school football players have a baseline concussion protocol. Everybody has to be screened in advance. Secondly, test annually. Third, pay attention to these weapons, and are there ways to modify them in such a way as to make the blast less damaging to the person that's doing it? And then finally, how do you protect people in terms of ear protection and those kinds of things? It's telling the Army, frankly, to do stuff they ought to be doing anyway. But we put it into the form of a statute so there'd be no mistake.
I think we've covered those three bills. Is there anything else post-Lewiston in terms of reform that you think needs to be said?
Well, probably should have said at the beginning that nothing we can do can bring those people back, and nothing we can do can really reach the hearts of those people that lost family members, the tragedy, a special tragedy, Phil, that didn't really get as much attention as I think it should have. There were 4 of those people that were killed were in the Maine deaf community. And the Maine deaf and hard of hearing community is a very close-knit group. I went to the funeral of one of them over here in Brunswick, and it was really touching to see these people that have this close relationship, and the loss was particularly damaging. It's almost like a big family, and the loss was so hard for them. We can't bring those people back, but what we can do is everything humanly possible to see that it doesn't happen again in Maine or anywhere else. That means dealing with the lethality of the weapons, that means better notification, and it means protecting people in the military from this traumatic brain injury that could lead to a tragedy like this. That's our obligation.